You know what I was singing on in the hall today? I was singing, and this is a true story. I was singing, "I will follow M wherever she may go."
You're a worry.
That's funny. Don't worry. That's funny.
I worry about you.
Yeah, well, for sure. I have all the best doctors on my case right now. I once worked for a guy who'd carry a knot of cash around with him that was bound only by an elastic band. "Cash is king," he would say to me. Now, this guy drove a Ferrari, so it's quite possible that he knew what he was talking about. But research from Achievers Workforce Institute suggests that, fast car or not, he may not have been on the money about what really motivates people these days. An AWI study asked employees if they'd prefer a job where they felt seen and appreciated every day, or a job that paid them 30% more, but those feelings were missing. Most employees, 75% in fact, picked the good feeling over a fatter wallet. Now, some value pay raises and promotions, some want the chance to innovate, and some are trying to see their name in bright lights. While every employee values something different, research shows that just about every employee in every generation values being seen and appreciated. One of the most stable and high impact influences on motivation for employees of every generation is frequent and meaningful recognition. Research demonstrates that the more frequently someone is recognized, the better they feel about their well-being, their sense of belonging, their engagement, their manager, and their loyalty to your company. In fact, while just over half of employees feel fairly compensated, that number jumps to 73% when someone is frequently recognized. Cash is critical, but it ain't the king. Welcome to A-Listed. Welcome back to A-Listed. You know, for the first time in history, 5 different generations are working side by side in the workplace, each bringing different expectations around feedback, career growth, what culture and leadership should look like. And while generational conversations often focus on differences, I think the real challenge for HR leaders is designing a workplace that really works for everyone. In this episode of A-Listed, we are delighted to welcome journalist and HR Brew reporter Mikaela Cohen to join Emma and I for a conversation on what she's seeing where generations are concerned. Mikaela, welcome.
Thank you guys for having me.
It's so great to be with you. So I want to begin with a question about, you know, the project of this podcast is to understand both the science and the stories of appreciation at work. And I'd love to understand from your career a moment where you felt appreciated and maybe compelled to move forward because you were appreciated.
Okay, I really like this question, and I feel like I'm a sucker when it comes to corporate swag. I'm actually wearing Morning Brew's. We got these are fairly new sweaters that we got. I'm also wearing a t-shirt that has Morning Brew, just because we're a remote empathetic company. We have folks in our New York office, but a lot of folks remotely. It makes me feel a part of something or attached to something when I don't necessarily get to see my coworkers face to face. And of course it's free, and who doesn't like free, comfortable things?
I love it.
It's amazing.
I love it. So you're covering generational dynamics. This has been a big focus area of your work. And I'm wondering, from your reporting at HR Brew, what are you seeing or where are you seeing some of the biggest friction points between generations right now? Is it around feedback? Is it around career growth? Is it around leadership? What are you seeing?
I like how you started off the conversation addressing that there are so many different generations in the workplace right now. You mentioned 5, and I always like to kind of poke at the fact that we are coming up on 6, if not already 6 in some instances, with Gen Alpha being at the oldest 15 years old. Of course, this is not in corporate settings, but you know, if you're an associate at a Target or a Walmart, you know, you could have a baby boomer and a Gen Alpha working side by side. at the cashier line. So it's amazing to see that. And, there's so many different socioeconomic, political factors, playing into that. But I think the thing that is the friction point is the understanding. Go on the internet and you see thousands of memes, thousands of Instagram reels just talking about how baby boomers don't understand why Gen Z or Gen Alpha always have their phone on them or are always attached to social media. And it's just because they grew up with it. It's almost like a sixth sense to them because it's just so ingratiated in how they communicate. So that understanding from the older generations down, and then even understanding from the generations up, that there were just things that were normal to baby boomers and Gen Xers that are not normal to us. And so we have to understand as younger generations that that's just their level of understanding and their level of entering the world, the same way that we have a different way of entering the world as well.
In a recent podcast episode, you talked about how Gen Z expects more frequent feedback than previous generations like millennials. Why do you think traditional, once a year performance reviews don't work for them? And what does better feedback look like in practice?
Right. I was thinking about this, and it's so interesting as a reporter covering Gen Z because I am Gen Z, and I have friends that give me feedback on stories that I'm working on. So I'm really coming in with not only sources, but also anecdotal and firsthand experiences. And I just ask myself, what makes me feel motivated at work? And most of the time it's just having my manager or my coworkers saying wow, that was really great. Good job. And just that recognition can kind of fuel you for days or weeks to come, versus if I only had that yearly performance review, I don't think that that necessarily would fuel you for the entirety of the year. So when you think about frequent feedback, I mean, in some roles, this may not be attainable, but if you have a weekly one-on-one with your manager, just asking them hey, is there anything I did great this week that you would like me to continue? And also, is there anything that I did this week that you would like me to improve on? And having those weekly check-ins should be, standard. And I think we talk to HR audiences, and it really just is about them setting that standard for managers, because a lot of times they may not know that younger employees need that because it may seem micromanagey or overbearing. And I think just that level setting in terms of what you need to feel successful in your role. It's different for everybody, but younger audiences probably need that more frequent recognition.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge for organizations today, is helping to close that gap of helping. Typically your managers are probably going to be older generations, and helping them understand that the needs of the younger workforce are actually different from what they needed when they were newly entering the workforce. It's a gap that I think is playing out across the world in organizations.
Absolutely. And it's always funny just hearing how older generations get confused by younger generations, but I think that confusion goes back and forth. And I've heard, I like to bring up the example of my uncle. He's a part of Gen X, and he told me recently, he was like, I don't understand why you guys need to be thanked all the time. Just having a job should be good enough. And I just told him, maybe that's what worked for you, but that's not what works for us. And just you even trying to have this conversation is a step in the right direction. I don't expect you to believe the same things I believe in, but if we can get to a level of mutual understanding is just the best that you can ask for in a co-working relationship.
I love that you had that conversation. That's playing out across workforces everywhere, and the more people who can have that conversation, the more change we're going to see in that space.
Absolutely.
Well, I love what you said there as well, because for me personally, I'm not, ironically, that interested in accolades. I don't want to be thanked over and over and over again, and I'm placing myself squarely in your uncle's generation. But what I know to be true is that frequent recognition is a critical form of feedback. And what I do crave is getting the signal on, am I doing a good job? What's the gap between good and great? How might I improve? And that frequency of recognition, especially when it's from your manager is a critical form of feedback.
Absolutely. And you just reminded me about another aspect of this in terms of surprises. I think that in the workplace, if you were to have been needing some improvement on a certain area, it may in years past could have waited until a yearly performance review, and it wouldn't have been that shocking or that surprising. You just understood that you were going to find out those things in your yearly performance review. But younger generations don't want it to be a surprise. They don't. I feel like the world is full of surprises and expect the unexpected elements, that we're just kind of like, the workplace is not a place I want to be surprised. Like, I want you to just let me know along the way what I need to improve on, so that way when I get to the yearly performance review, it's not a surprise, because we have too much unexpected things in the world right now.
I think you're exactly right. I'm so glad you brought up that turn of phrase around surprise too. Our own research shows that most employees, and this is stable across the 5 generations that we survey, say that they don't feel capable of dealing with the unexpected. Just 23% feel capable of managing unexpected challenges. So I think that's a really critical point you make. Something else, how did you describe where you work or your working style? It was empathetic something.
Remote empathetic.
Okay, what does that mean? That's really interesting.
This is something that was new to me when I joined Morning Brew as well. So we cover a lot of different work structures. I am a strategy reporter too, so that's kind of within my beat in terms of like asking companies how they work and when they work. So from Morning Brew's perspective, we have fully remote employees, but we also have employees that are based in New York and located in our office. So whether that's different departments like sales or revenue, those kind of client-focused, sales-focused roles will be fully in New York and fully in the office. But we also have fully remote folks like me based in Chicago, and folks based, all over the country.
So you're rarely seeing your colleagues in person. And I'm guessing, and I don't want to lead the witness here, but I'm guessing that swag is one component that helps you feel connected, but that sort of appreciation helps you feel connected to people that you don't see that often.
Absolutely. And I can't speak for every single one of us at Morning Brew, but I personally have a fantastic manager, and I think she does an amazing job of recognizing me, what I do well, and also like giving me that constant feedback whenever like there are things for improvement, so that way we can have that continual conversation. Like, that should never be a start and an end to feedback. There should be just continual feedback.
So that's a great segue into the role that managers play, and it's a critical role. Research from Achievers Workforce Institute shows that recognition from managers is surprisingly low across all generations. Only 18% of Gen Z say their manager recognizing them regularly, compared to 17% of millennials, 13% of Gen X, just 11% for boomers. So not great across the board. What does that tell us about what organizations may be missing when it comes to supporting a multi-generational workforce?
I feel like every conversation I have with a CHRO, with a future of work expert, whenever I ask what the solution to XYZ problem is, almost always they say managerial support. I feel like if you think about a thankless role, managers are often times the most overworked and under-resourced. So, I mean, better supporting your managers, whether that's training in terms of recognition or feedback, like run the gamut of any topic in the workplace. Like, your managers probably need more help and more support there, and that ultimately will impact all of the employees under them.
I completely agree with you. We've been studying what great managers do for the last 6 or 7 years, and we've identified 4 factors that great managers exhibit every single day, and usually all at once. Their great managers are frequently in contact with their team members, to your earlier point. They're frequent and meaningful recognizers, so it's not just a pat on the back. It's specific, it's personal, it's impact oriented. They're also great at coaching and career development conversations. And Gallup studies this too. Gallup, their breadth of research is greater than ours, but over 30 years, 183,000 teams, they've found that frequent recognition, again, is one of the things that separates the great teams from the also-rans.
Wow. I mean, it all makes sense in terms of I see that working on my micro level with the relationship my manager and I have. And I can just imagine that that would translate to any org, any role in the industry. And you'd also, I mean, I guess, the research is supporting this, but it's not frequent. Like when I talk to my peers or colleagues, and not colleagues, but my peers in other media orgs or even other industries, having that great of a relationship with your manager, I think is fewer and farther to come by.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's much harder to get, or it's much easier to come across an okay manager versus a great manager. I think that people are all living lives and, maybe some people could be great managers, but they're going through something, or maybe their organization makes it really hard for them. Again, the lack of the support, the lack of resources. We're seeing AI kind of like throw a monkey wrench in every single component of what we're talking about. So I think it's just really a hard time to be a human, and an even harder time to be a manager of humans. So I think that like people are just really kind of going through it right now. And so I don't necessarily blame them on not excelling maybe at their managerial skills versus just try to like get by and hit their KPIs and complete their projects.
What does your manager do so well?
The frequent communication, when you said that in terms of being a great indicator of a good managerial relationship, I think just those like rarely a morning will go by when she doesn't Slack me, hey, good morning. Or if she knows I have something going on in life, like I can always count on her a few days later to actually check on me and check on that aspect. If my dog is sick, she always, follows up and checks on him. So I just feel like she sees me beyond the computer screen. Like she also sees me as a human being.
I love that. You're lucky.
It is very lucky.
The themes that have come up today, like support and empathy, seem to be a big part of who you are as a human and how you operate as well. And you mentioned earlier that you're talking about how hard leaders have it as well. And it's so important to realize that leaders are people too. They also need recognition. They also need frequent communication and that support as well. How does that work in your environment? How do you feel like, obviously your leader is making that effort with you, but how are you supporting your leader as well in similar ways?
Yeah, I mean, going kind of to the first part of what you mentioned in terms of what leaders could be doing or already doing that they could do more of, I think transparency. I think there's so much going on in the world and so much affecting businesses that a lot of the times just saying like, hey, this thing is happening. Here's how it may or may not affect us. And if you have any questions and I don't know, I'll let you know that I don't know, and I'll try to get an answer. I think that often goes overlooked because leaders don't want to say they don't know. They'd rather, dodge a question or, maybe wait to answer or address it when they know more. But I think addressing the elephant in the room always goes much further than ignoring the elephant in the room.
That's a great point of view. I was part of a workshop yesterday, and we started the workshop with an exercise called Stinky Fish. Have you done Stinky Fish?
I feel like I've heard of it, but I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Emma, Stinky Fish?
I have heard of it, yes.
Yeah. So what we did was it was all a group of leaders, and we began for maybe 1 minute, just writing down things we were worried about or concerned about, like saying the unsaid. And then we huddled with our neighbors and sort of collated our worries, our stinky fish, and then we put them all on a board. And that is such a simple exercise, but it gave voice and name to the things we were concerned about and allowed us all to have a much more, constructive conversation during the hour or two that we had together.
I love that. And I'm sure there were multiple of the same stinky fish on that board, inevitably.
That's exactly right. It's amazing how your shoulders go down eventually too. Someone smart once said to me, a problem shared is a problem halved. And we were all able in that moment just to deal with the issues at hand rather than the things that were, to the left or to the right that we were worried about.
Right.
Okay, so here's the $1 million question. It's an impossible question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. We have all of these generations, 5.56, you'd argue, active in the workplace. With that in mind, how can HR leaders design programs that work for all the different individuals that are in that range of generations? What's the one or two things they could start doing differently today?
I ask this question in almost every interview, and I love the varying responses because, of course, there's where my mind initially goes, which is don't issue blanket statements or blanket policies. And the first place my mind also jumps to is total rewards, right? So benefits and perks will not look the same for every generation, especially the older generations as they get closer to retirement. Maybe Gen Z and Gen Alpha don't want to spend a third of their paycheck on a 401k. So instead of having them invest in that, can they invest in other things like pet insurance or investing in the stock market? Like, there's so many other ways of thinking about strategies that it'll probably save the company money as well. So HR leaders are, of course, also focused on how to better the organization and ROI. And I think that allowing your employees the choice in which benefits work for them and to give, again, feedback on what's working and what's not will end up saving the company a lot of time and a lot of money and for the HR professionals, a headache in terms of underutilization of their benefits. I know that that's a topic that's top of mind for them and total rewards professionals. So, of course, just like seeing what your employees want, asking them, and then being okay with making adjustments. If you're really proud of this benefit and this perk or this plan, and you find out that employees don't actually like it or use it, it's okay to, again, recognize that it didn't work out and then pivot or switch to a different option.
How much of that do you think is generational versus lifestyle or life stage? So I'll use David and I as an example. Same generation, but different lifestyles. So when it comes to total rewards, things that appeal to David, it might be more family orientated, things he can do with the kids and things like that. Whereas me, I'm far more interested in the pet insurance. So how much of that are organizations thinking about that as a generational thing, or are they thinking about it as personal choice regardless of generation because there's more complexity there?
Right. And I like how you use complexity because I think before, in a more traditional HR setting, they were only thinking of it in terms of life stages. So they were like, okay, all of our employees between X age and X age, we're going to make sure that they have paternity and maternity leave. And you're allocating, XY amount of money to make sure that all of your employees have that benefit. But you're not taking into consideration that there are employees in that same life stage that may not have those same desires or those same goals. So you're setting aside money for them to do that, but you could actually be allowing them the choice and to utilize that benefit in a different way. So I know that a lot of organizations are starting to shift away from maternity and paternity leave and allocating money for family forming benefits, whether that's adoption or other things that are just a bigger umbrella of that same kind of category. Kind of allows for the progressive movement around benefits, and life stage doesn't necessarily look the same for everyone. And of course, there are also different generations that could be in similar life stages. Like someone in Gen X could be just as invested in their dogs as someone in Gen Z. So that would be important to both of them. And the same could be said too for going on maternity leave. Someone in Gen X and Gen Z could be doing that at the same time. So I think that HR leaders are starting to, if they're not already open to that. I think we're moving into more holistic approaches to generational differences.
Generations it's a really interesting lens to look through, but I wonder how useful it is. I mean, I wonder if it's just interesting. Are life stages more useful as we try to build programs that are more attuned to the hyper personalization that people demand now from their employer?
I think so. I like to think optimistically about generational differences because of course, there are critics of it that are like, oh, this is, in 10 years, we're going to be talking about Gen Alpha the same that we're talking about Gen Z, the same that we talked about millennials. And that's true, but Gen Alpha is coming up at a different world stage that the other generations came up through. And that can be said of every generation. And each generation is bringing in their own unique experiences and fears and wants and desires. Like, I can imagine that Gen Z, in maybe a dissimilar way as Gen X, wants more stability because stability isn't inherent in a career choice anymore. So we have to get more creative in how we build stability. And so that's going to be a stronger desire for them because it's not going to be as easy to come by. And so employers could use that strategically in an offering benefit or role to kind of market itself as like a more stable company or position. And that could be like leverage in recruiting talent.
You spoke earlier about the surprise of the moment that we're in, that there's great uncertainty everywhere. I'm seeing a resurgence of resilience as a key theme. And I'm wondering if that's surfacing in your conversations in any way as sort of a stabilizing factor for every generation.
Like we've almost like just kind of pick and choose whichever global event is going on and the generation had to adapt. I do think that is a common theme. I think of millennials. A lot of my millennial coworkers remember what it was like to graduate college and enter the labor market during the 2008 recession. And I'm like, oh, I was in elementary school at that point. I don't really remember it. But
how dare you bring that up?
But I do remember what it was like to graduate in 2020 during COVID. So it's almost like cut and paste, like different life experiences, but similar to resilience. So I do agree. And I'm sorry that I did just age myself down, which I have to be able to capitalize while I still can before Gen Alpha takes it away from me.
That's right. Get while the going's good. Well, the reason I asked the question is that, you mentioned COVID. We saw in our own research, resilience emerge as a theme during that period as people were able to demonstrate, as an individual, as a team, I can survive and thrive through anything. But as we moved into a new normal, I saw that theme sort of go away. And business leaders, quite frankly, dismissed as a bit of woo-woo. But I'm seeing it. Jeannie Moretti, ex of IBM, had this great quote that, AI will replace 10% of jobs, but will impact 100%. And that to me is one of the big elephants in the room at the moment. And I wonder if resilience reemerges as a way of explaining how every generation needs to be adaptable given the moment that we're in.
AI does scare me. I will say, I do speak to future of work leaders, and I don't think it's going to completely replace humans. And I think it's going to actually increase the value of human work. But I think the unknown factor is what you're saying in terms of how we're going to adapt to it. I don't think that's as clear. And I think we're all kind of living through that moment the same way that folks were working through the pandemic and working through the recession. And while I don't know exactly what that's like, I guess I will know what it's like to have to work through the emergence of AI. And we'll be able to look back in 10 years and be like, wow, remember how we were all so curious how that was going to shake out? And then it did. And hopefully we'll get to see another, shake out in 20 years time. But here's to hoping, right?
I love that. Emma, final question from you.
Yeah, there's a lot of focus on generational differences at work, and we've spoken a lot about that today. Achievers Workforce Institute also shows something really interesting in that every generation has in common. Every generation wants to feel seen, valued, and connected to meaningful work. In your reporting, where do you actually see the alignment between generations that leaders perhaps might overlook?
A sense of belonging. I think everybody, no matter what age you are, and no matter how much you may not want it on a day-to-day basis, would probably like a friend at work. Whether that's someone you see every day, or if you want to be completely remote and only see them once a quarter. I think it is that sense of like, I know this person, they know me, and we share this experience of the workplace. I think that's going to be transient across every single employee, depending on how big or how small they want that relationship to be. I do think that a sense of belonging and friendship in the workplace does kind of have the through line across all generations.
I agree. It's that human connection. It doesn't matter how old you are. That's still super important, and I think also makes the biggest difference to your day at work. You mentioned it
Absolutely.
earlier as your manager saying good morning. Something as simple as that makes you feel like you're known, you're seen. Someone would miss you if you weren't there, and I think that's incredibly important.
Right.
Well, Mikaela, we certainly appreciate the human contribution that you make, and we want to thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you so much, and thank you all for listening and watching to A-Listed.
Welcome back to A-Listed. Another great conversation, this time with Mikaela from HR Brew. Mikaela talked a lot about generations and the impact of that on the workforce and the complexity around that. David, what was your biggest takeaway from the conversation with Mikaela?
There are a couple of things. I mean, I think one of the things she talked about was no one likes to be surprised. And she talked about sort of the surprise of the current culture, the economic conditions, the geopolitical uncertainty, and that really, in her research and reporting, she's seeing sort of distaste for the state of surprise across all generations. That was a takeaway, and very much in line with our own research around an employee's confidence that they can deal with unexpected challenges. So I thought that was interesting, but I thought the most interesting part of the conversation was when we challenged a little bit how important the generational lens is, and if in fact life stages provide maybe a more accurate view of the things we should be supplying for our people in meeting them in the moments that matter to them.
That's it. What stands out for me is that importance of choice for employees, and that designing for many often doesn't work because not so much because of the generation, but because of life stage or lifestyle. The things that are important to me are going to be different to the things that are important to you. And so, particularly when it comes to designing reward experiences, that ability to give people choice in personalization and what can be offered is so important to engagement and how they feel about work. You saw Mikaela really proud about the swag that she was wearing.
Yes.
Yes, and that ability, even when it comes to that kind of experience, to be able to choose the size of your, I'm going to say jumper because I'm in Australia, but choose the size of your jumper or your t-shirt is incredibly important for people to have a great experience.
It's an interesting call out because one thing we see in our research is that every employee of every generation really doing every job wants to feel seen and valued and appreciated and understood. But how that comes to life for them is deeply personal. And so I think that was an interesting factor in the conversation too.
The other thing that stood out for me is that it's about to get a whole lot more complex as well as Gen Alpha comes into the workforce. They're already entering the workforce. And so we're going to have very soon, even in the corporate environment, 6 generations, all with different perspectives, different experiences, different needs. And when you bring in the challenges we're facing with the uncertainty around AI, there's a whole lot more coming our way. So resilience is going to be key.
Well, buckle up and good luck, I guess.
Absolutely. This has been another episode of A-Listed, a podcast where we explore the stories and science behind appreciation at work. Thank you to Mikaela from HR Brew for joining us today. You can subscribe to A-Listed wherever you get your podcasts.